Well, hello, Michael. Love to have you here on Stack today. Thanks for joining us. As we do with any guest, before we get into our topic today, where we're going to talk about the role of freight technology, data, and of course, automations to help create some operational efficiencies here in our industry for freight market participants. Our listeners always like to know who we're talking to. So if you can give us a little bit about your background, Michael, and a little bit about where you work, Transflo.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Adam. And it's a pleasure to be here. Wish we were face to face. My name is Michael Southworth. I'm a relatively new president of Transflo. I started in September of this past year. And my background is in technology over the last 25 plus years. I grew up in Silicon Valley. And since then, I've been with 6 companies, all sort of emerging companies, a lot like Transflo, looking to get to the next step in their journey. For the last 10 years, I've been with a couple companies focused on digital transformation. And that's, in the broad sense, is really what's going on in the transportation market as well.
Yeah, 2020 saw its slew of disruptions, primarily the pandemic that we're still largely dealing with, and the changes that went along with that. But it's not like disruptions weren't something new in the world of freight, transportation, and supply chain. We saw the great capacity crunch in 2018, largely after the ELD mandate kind of came in place and carriers had to respond. Then they boosted up on assets, and 2019 saw a bit of a dip. And then, of course, as March and April kind of settled here in 2020, as we started staying at home and people started ordering things online more often, we saw great volatility, especially in the truckload space, with spot market changes, and then, of course, eventually impacting contract. And I think largely we're starting to absorb some of that volatility and starting to get used to it. But as a way to respond, I know we at Sonar saw great demand in our technology platform because people just wanted to make better decisions and get more data to get informed. And so amidst these disruptions, it looks like people do flock to technology as a way to hedge risk, but as a way to maybe become more operationally efficient, maybe allow them to gain more revenue, get more efficient in their workflows to provide a better experience. But from your perspective, why do companies tend to gravitate towards technology in times of great disruption or volatility?
That's a great question. Certainly COVID and I'll say some of the push by the digital freight brokers have accelerated some of the themes of technology adoption in transportation. When I came to Transflo, one of the reasons why I was excited about the opportunity to be full-time in the transportation space is that it was, as by and large, earlier in its journey of this digital transformation, adoption of some of these new technologies. The marketplace largely is uncooperative. It's very complex. It's highly fragmented. But at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of data as you go from the shipper all the way into to the driver. The opportunity is there, moving from a paper environment to a digital environment. And now, what you guys are very good at is that data environment, right? Taking that data and harnessing it to provide insights. So like you said, I think disruption forces folks to relook at their business, right? Realize that there is some breakpoints, right? Capacity changing very quickly, almost overnight. I think for owners, operators, for large freight brokers, they look at it and say, I have some issues. I can't scale fast enough. Maybe there's a technology solution there. At the same time, and we try to do a better job at Transflo, the case studies for brokers and carriers that have been on the front end of technology are very positive. The return on investment has been there, and largely, and maybe anecdotally, those are the businesses that are growing faster in this marketplace. And so I think people, when they look around, they're seeing the opportunities to accelerate their business long term.
Yeah, that's really what it's all about, right? I mean, you may have short-term problems, but honestly, I assume a lot of these companies want to be in business next year, 3 years, and in 5 years. We never want to get caught, I think, again. Sometimes a lot of pain might have to happen before you start saying it's really time that we start looking at this from a holistic, fundamental aspect, not just using technology to seem cool, to attract employees, although that's one aspect of it, or just to say that you have a system Now we're really starting to look into specialization. We're starting to look at the role of data and analytics, as you alluded to here. And as freight technology proliferates, and maybe we can draw it back to the 1990s when, you know, the TMS started becoming more popular, but it's not like freight technology hasn't been, you know, around for a while. But we're starting to see a lot of these companies, you know, really specialize, understand the role of technology, that it's not just a general band-aid to help you manage here and there, but still have, you know, some data or processes outside of the technology. We're really starting to see some of the integration aspects using API, really, you know, bring all of these processes within freight and transportation specifically either into one consolidated platform, or by integrating other platforms, we kind of get this view of information. Now, I think when we look at data and analytics, I always seem, you know, really curious of why there hasn't been more of an uptake in the supply chain. And I think you had said earlier, it's all about that fragmented aspect. And so when leaders are out here saying, cool, I should use data and analytics, that sounds awesome. How do they bring all that together? How are you guys helping them at Transflo, as an example, with some of the use cases you're seeing of bringing in disparate data and making the right, best next decision?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. You know, when I think of technology, you know, and you brought up TMS for example, in the 90s, you know, generation one, and moving into 2000s, you get into second and third generations of these platforms. They're best of class and really independent solutions, standalone solutions. And then as you get into future versions, right, you think about integrations, APIs, and ultimately you get into a connected suite ecosystem. And I think that's where the market is evolving. And with that, you can actually start linking this data together and providing real insights. And so part of it is the sort of natural evolution of the platforms themselves, and the cooperation between the vendors, which is terrific. Certainly the technology has gotten better overall. Most folks are looking at, you know, open systems, and as a part of doing business, understanding that it's a very heterogeneous environment, meaning there's not one system from soup to nuts that is going to take you there. And you also have a lot of independent drivers, and how do you make sure that you can extend this technology to them? Similar to what you described, we look at it very similar, and you know, data ultimately is where we want to move. If you look at some background around Transflo, we started in the document imaging business, and still have a couple thousand truck stop scanning solutions, and we moved into more the digital environment, working on the workflows, digitizing that information, and focused around automation. Now we have, 80% or so of the largest carriers, over 60,000 carriers on our platform, and we have an incredible amount of data. And the question is, how do we harness that? And it starts, at least for us, is building that open and secure environment that we can tap into in a sort of easy way. And that's a big task because, again, you have a very fragmented industry with a lot of stakeholders and third parties that are also stakeholders. So it's not just the shippers and the brokers and the carriers and the drivers. There's factoring companies and audit companies and a host of other providers that would like information as well. So building that sort of core fundamental platform that we can leverage is really where we are in that process. But the use cases, there's a number of them. I think capacity management, which you brought up with providing additional visibility into brokers is really important, and that's one use of the information for us. It's really, as you know, it's very unprofitable for brokers to sign up new carriers for single loads. To the extent that we can matchmake the broker with the carriers for specific lanes, that is an incredible amount of value in the process. I mentioned auditing before. That's another area where we think we can reduce or underwrite the cost of transportation, providing more visibility to auditing firms, and to the extent that they're able to track those loads from A to Z, it's easier for them. Fraud is reduced in that environment. And we're also using data in our machine learning back office environment to automate a lot of the processes, which is obviously super important for large brokers and carriers.
Yeah, that's a lot of good use cases, and I think we're starting to see a lot of companies look at these platforms that they're providing and say, hey, what is possible, right? And you almost have to go back to the drawing board, and it might have started 5 years ago, especially with partnerships and the willingness to work together with this big fat word in the supply chain called visibility. And, and I would argue a lot of what you just described is a definition of visibility. Visibility can be just being easily able to see from an executive level what's going on and where are all the processes at a moment's notice. I use a project management tool for marketing, for production of content. It's no different than a supply chain, right? I'm producing something, but when I have multiple team members, multiple processes, multiple assets, and multiple channels to distribute it through, I need to understand with granularity and at any time where all of those processes are as an executive, so I can understand my team's workload balance, so I can make decisions on what else can we add, to these programs without breaking us. But visibility also goes into having more visibility into your own business and largely where the market is going. So when you have customers coming to you and they're talking about visibility, what are they really talking about from your perspective? Is it just that end-to-end supply chain visibility of all my processes? Is it where's my freight load right now? Is it how is my business doing and how can I gain visibility into what I should do next? Or is it all of those things? And how are executives viewing visibility today?
Yeah, I certainly look at it as all of those things. And the one use case certainly is visibility of the loads. And I think where the market has been challenged is connecting that whole ecosystem. And that's a big focus of our investment, from shipper all the way out to the driver. And so connecting shipper to broker is done and broker to carrier. But all the way to the driver is difficult, and ensuring that the driver adopts the solutions. And so you have that visibility is really important around that. The other area is around capacity management, right? Understanding the overall visibility and flexibility that you have to secure freight, and whether you're doing it directly or through the spot market is also important. So certainly in this area, to the extent that you can provide actionable intelligence out to the party, you can drive real value, and digitizing that and leveraging that information is really important. The opportunity is there, so whether it's making a load, for example, a digital tender load versus doing it in a traditional way, you'll see, from at least from our case studies, it's about an 80% reduction. Right, so you're providing a broker visibility into carriers that are able to take that load. It's doing it somewhat automated, right? It's at least it's digital, right? You're not using resources to complete that tender. Is very helpful, right? That in an ideal world, that load is being tendered faster, right? With less resources on your side. And with that connects directly into the driver, so you're seeing that load all the way through. So I think the short story again is it's across the board in terms of providing insights and visibility both to the loads as well as to the information.
Yeah, around that ecosystem, right, and the players involved. Again, if I go back to my project management standpoint, let's say in any project, you have a leader, a project manager, a decision maker. And you also have people who need to execute, right? And so when we talk about this ecosystem and we're talking about technology, so you may start with a platform and then you say, okay, there's certain functionalities where I want to, make sure I pipe in these types of things. Maybe it's a sonar module within, a Transflo execution system, and that person before they execute a load is maybe getting a sense of rate per mile in those various lanes where they're trying to execute, and how it might be difficult to find capacity or it may not. And so they're starting to really think about these things and really starting to focus on the execution side. And, I think in freight technology, when we think about the ecosystem and the various players, are we better off when we're able to provide them with, the simple, here's the action you take next, and also just making that executable? Because I hear a lot when I'm talking to Sonar customers and other people who use freight technology platforms, they really just want to get their job done. They maybe don't necessarily care how all of the platform works, or even that we use words like visibility or execution. To them, it's about making the job easier. So how do we pivot from this, hey, here's what technology can make possible, and using buzzwords, to really start talking about the ecosystem players and what they need to do to get their job done and make it easier? What does that conversation look like as you're having them with new potential customers, Michael?
I tend to focus, it's a good question. I tend to focus on the business value and not about the technology. And, very similar to your experience, I came out of a world of automation, and it was across all industries. And I think there's a lot of similarities with what we're seeing in transportation with other industries, even consumer behavior, if we move it into our own lives. People in general will self-serve. They'll choose to self-serve if it's more efficient, meaning they don't desire to walk in a bank and talk to the teller. That is something that they lean into as a highlight of their day. What they want to do is complete a particular transaction, and whether that's through an ATM or a mobile app, or it's automated, right, with automated transfers, so something like that. To the extent that it's frictionless, they're pretty happy. And so rather than get into the weeds of the technology, just talking to them about here's how we're seeing you guys do it today. If we're looking at their environment, here's the opportunity to change that, and here's the business value, is where we tend to focus on it. And what's great about transportation is it's a high number of transactions. So while one transaction may save only $8, when you multiply that by thousands of loads on a monthly basis, and you compute that into other items that they could be doing, it becomes really meaningful. And that's what I'm excited about. And when I look at transportation, it's still largely a paper-driven, a personal phone call-driven world. And it can change, and it will change. And I think that's ultimately will benefit the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, so we can maybe start to work on some bigger picture items. There's a lot of challenges out there. And when you're mired down by the weeds of process and your job is harder to do, it's really tough to sit there and say, hey, I'm glad that we invested in this technology, but it's not really making the tough times any easier. In fact, I have to go out and find additional Band-Aids to fix this. And I think one of the things that we've really talked about that is a thread throughout this, especially specific to freight, is how freight technology can help improve the simple supply and demand market that is freight, especially truckload freight, right? And it's all about, these days, as a shipper or a broker, being able to find space in a truck that is at a desired price, that might be easy to book, as a shipper that is easy to process and doesn't break your budget, and as a broker allows you to procure capacity at a price that allows you to add and protect to your margins. And for carriers, just because capacity is tight and it's more of a carrier's market does not mean that they themselves can't reposition maybe unused assets or improve deadheading, through some backhaul opportunities. So when it comes to technology and finding capacity, it sounds like we're just really using technology to find space. What are some other industries that you've worked in that kind of match that supply and demand aspect, and how technology has maybe aided in finding the capacity in other industries?
Yeah, I think, let me think about that for a second. The area where, what's similar to sort of your question, I'll relate it to a popular analyst. Gartner covers a lot of different industries, including transportation. And one of the things that they said is as we introduce artificial intelligence, a lot of the machine learning technologies and automation technologies, that will drastically reduce contact centers. And the theory was that everything will be automated. But the result, if you fast forward 5 years, is that when when those technologies were implemented, customers engaged with their service providers at a much higher rate. And what it allowed the contact center, the business to do, the customer service agent to do, is to focus on the problems, focus on the challenges, and resolve those, ideally much faster, but with much more time. If you apply that same sort of thought process in the transportation space, to the extent that we can automate that 80% of the transactions and focus on the challenging ones with those same resources, certainly it frees up some mind share to do other things, like you said, right, for brokers or carriers to be more efficient with those, with the time that they have. I think, in any highly competitive industry, that thought process around continuous improvement is super important. And largely in any transaction-heavy business like transportation, technology is going to be one pathway, one really important pathway to get there.
Yeah, and I think some of the bridges that we have to make, no pun intended in the freight world as we're talking about that, but, I know as someone who over the last decade has seen largely a TMS environment and then major investment in visibility tools and then a huge investment in the digital freight marketplace and aggregation space. We can't just push these down our users, universe and say, you must do this or you will get left behind. I think it's easy to say and it's easy to, tout that, but we have to really have these kinds of bridges. And I think one of those bridges where maybe you guys have really done a good job is with that documentation center, right? We have bills of lading, we have, PODs, we have various documentation involved that has largely been paper-based. So you guys have done something interesting with drop-off spots and your app. So how are you guys, especially with drivers, right? Because I think that's what I hear the most from leaders like yourself, is that last aspect, those individual drivers and getting them to close the loop in our platform ecosystem. How are you helping them bridge the gap between traditional paperwork and processes to that digital paperwork, especially those drivers?
Right, and the drivers are our challenge, right? It's highly fragmented, as we've talked about today. There's around 3 million plus or minus professional drivers working for thousands and thousands of carriers as well as owner operators. And so, what we believe generally is that, in any large carrier market, that it will continue to be heterogeneous. So Transflo, as you know, we have our drop boxes and scanning, truck stop scanning solutions at a couple thousand locations around North America. For certain use cases, that works out great for drivers. Over the last 10 years, we've really promoted a mobility solution for those the same application. So moved from, say, document intelligence to digital intelligence. And about 80% or so of our transactions today fall in the mobile app, as you would expect. It's more convenient. It's a cheaper solution. It's with you at all times. And with that, extracting that data early in the process and automating the workflow in the back office with the TMS is really how we're migrating customers today to make it even simpler. It's one thing to have a workflow around paper. It's another thing to have an automated process around data. And that's really where, we can see some improvement in the back office, whether we're doing that work or whether our customers are doing that back office work. But, the flip of the switch, at least within our customer base, we're not seeing that, but we are seeing that continued migration, and throughout that process, they're getting the business benefit from it.
Yeah, it's incumbent upon technology providers to stay patient. Remember that not everybody is, a tech first kind of person. People have their ways. We got to be respectful of that, And I think, however, the real truth is that I think we're in an all rising tides lift all boats kind of environment right now, right? And I think about the amount of DoorDash or the amount of third-party delivery restaurant apps I've used in quarantine, and it's quite considerably increased. And I was just kind of thinking about this last night, how, you take this pandemic and the surge of activity in that kind of economy where gig workers are using an app that's powered by a corporate office and technology that's then working with another entity, a restaurant, and in you, the end consumer, and just the considerable amount of technology that goes into making that experience amazing. And, in the traditional world of freight, we have to do that same thing now, right? And if we want to have our customers, maybe for you guys, it's a big shipper in the furniture space who's sitting there and saying, I think Wayfair's okay, but I have a boutique furniture shop and I have great products, and I've been seeing instrumental growth on my orders, and I'm ready to go, from retailers, and I'm ready to go direct to consumer, and I want to figure out how the heck I can do that, make sure my e-commerce shop's set up, make sure my apps are ready, my customer has transparency into shipping, and all of it just works, right? And so I think, from your perspective, how are we going to help with these kind of workflow process automations, analytics, and data platform to make better decisions? How are we going to go from that to helping customers think more strategically? Is that supposed to be the final output? Are we supposed to help just beyond what we help them with initially, maybe improving their freight processes and finding capacity at a good rate? Is it then our job to help them get to even a better strategic place? And is that our role with our technology to give them that foundation?
Well, I think we have a role to play. Every customer is different in terms of how they think about, technology overall, and they may not have the internal capability. And so we have customers that are leading the charge, and we have other customers that are laggards in the marketplace. And we said, I think you mentioned drivers are average age, I think, is over 50 right now, right? And even the individual drivers made it different technology fitness, digital fitness, and for them. We like to introduce ideas, and we'll give an example of EBOL, EPOD is early in the market adoption right now. Less than 5% are electronic from end to end today. But your example of a new shipper, a boutique furniture store that's just getting started, is that an area that they want to invest in, or are they going to invest in a sort of traditional HUD and shipping yard and things like that? Could they maximize those efficiencies? If we go back and think about technology over the last 20 years, in most cases, it's not the incumbents that are advancing technology into the next generation. It's outside parties that are forcing that change. And some in the industry will step up to those, and others will not, right? They'll go the way of the dinosaur. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to show them sort of the art of the possible, what that future could look like, and most importantly, how that could advantage their customers and ultimately their business.
Yeah, and I'm a marketer, right? I like to be a storyteller, especially in our space, in the B2B space, because it is incumbent upon us to tell them what's possible, and then to onboard them with our technology to get them there and deliver that promise. But then to go beyond that as not just a tech provider, but also a strategic partner for their ultimate success, where we allow the staff at our companies, the points of contacts at our customers, to really work together in such a way to help them be better business people and more efficient at their job, but to be a bigger role in their own company, to help move the company forward. Is Amazon a retailer? Are they a warehouse company? Are they a 3PL? Are they a logistics provider? Are they a technology provider? Sometimes it's hard to know that answer. Largely, they're all of them. But they really focused in on using technology to automate a lot of processes. And I think all of us thank them for showing what's possible. And then obviously, competitors had to keep up. And that's the great thing about capitalism and technology and our economy today, is that there's this great opportunity to pivot towards what's the future, what's possible. So I want to leave our listeners with maybe your perspective. In 2018, it was all blockchain, and then more people started talking about machine learning, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence. But maybe what's next on the horizon is that freight tech leaders should know about when it comes to freight technology and what might be possible in the next few years.
Well, coming from a data background, I think there's a lot more that can be done around data intelligence. And, as I look from my own little world within Transflo, leveraging the data, and we gave a couple, you and I both walked through a couple of examples of that. I think it will more than anything transform transportation. I know that's an answer that is probably been stated by a number of guests, but we're there now. We're very close in terms of leveraging that and providing real business value, and more than just growing a company and having a good experience. That's what's the fun part. The incremental change in providing value for products is interesting, and it's a part of business. But those transformational opportunities where you're taking a customer from A to M in one big jump, and I think ultimately providing those insights with data, because it's there, is going to play the largest role in making that happen. So that's my final answer.
Yeah, I love it. It's almost like showing your homework and proving that you had that value. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on to Stack today, the show about freight technology and what's possible in the next few coming years with a great freight tech stack. So thanks for lending our listeners with your thoughts and your expertise. Would love to have you again, maybe follow up in a year and see where we're at on some of those fronts. But thanks so much. And for all of our listeners out there of Stacked, we thank you for tuning in for another episode.